Well, welcome to another wine conversation. It's David Bear here with Wine Bear, and today we're going to be speaking about the region of Beaujolais. This is a region that maybe you've heard of, maybe you've had some wines from the region in the past, but I bet you don't know Beaujolais as well as you need to. And after today's conversation, you are going to really have a lot more knowledge about the region, and I bet you're going to be wanting to drink a lot of these wines as well. So as my guests today, we have the founder and creator and wine producer in the Beaujolais region, the sub-region of Brouilly, Robert Peroux, and along with him, his export manager and U.S. Resident right now, promoting the wines from Terroir Originel, Aurélien Fiardet. So I hope I did a good job pronouncing names there.
Yeah.
How did I do, Aurélien?
No, it was good. It was good.
Very good. Very good.
French,
Yeah. And welcome, Robert.
Yeah. Hello, bonjour. Yeah. Bonsoir.
That's right. We have a change of time zones here. So I wanted to have you gentlemen on today to talk about Beaujolais. It's a region that I think many people either know, they've heard of, maybe they've had an encounter with Beaujolais Nouveau, but they don't necessarily really know Beaujolais very well. And so I want to understand a little bit about your organization, Terroir Originel. It's a group of, I think, around 25 different producers at this point. Your wines are here in the U.S. in about 15 different states currently, and I know that you have around a dozen different countries you're exporting to around the world as well. But the organization started, I think, to address a problem that you were having in getting Beaujolais recognized and marketed effectively. So I think first, before we jump into that story, for people who don't know, Beaujolais is the southernmost part of the Burgundy region. It's just north of the city of Lyon, and it produces two grapes primarily, although there are other grapes there. The red wines are made from the Gamay grape. There are white wines made from Chardonnay as well, and then there are some exceptions to those. But so that's a little context. And Aurélien, why don't you jump in and share a little bit about the background of Terroir Originel and what Robert has created here?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So Terroir Originel is a human adventure we started in 1997. Yeah. And Robert Peroux is 6 other winemakers started the company Terroir Originel. And the origin of the company is very related to the history of the Beaujolais region. Since the 50s, 60s, Beaujolais has been associated to the Beaujolais Nouveau events and sales, and a lot of small wineries were making Beaujolais different from Beaujolais Nouveau, get a little bit forgotten in this phenomenon. So in order to come back on the market, and promote their wines and to exist again, Robert Peroux, with 6 other vintners from Beaujolais, decided to create Terroir Originel in order to be stronger, and to mutualize, their power, to be able to communicate about their wines and to distribute their wines too. So that's how Terroir Originel started. In the mid 80s, 90s, the 85% of the Beaujolais wines were sold by Négociant on the global market. So the independent producer like Robert Peroux in Brouilly represented only 15%.
Could you explain to our audience what a négociant is?
So the négociants are companies buying jug wine and bottling the wine to the facility, and they put their label on it, but it's more a brand, but the wine is not estate grown and made on the estates. So they are just like a mediation between the farmers and the markets. They just put the wine on the market. That's what Négociant do, yeah.
Yep. And so at this point in time, when Robert and his colleagues got together and formed this group, what were they doing? Were they making their own wines and trying to sell them on their own, or had they been selling them off to Negociant? How did that all work at that time?
So they were making a little bit of wine, but the biggest quantity was sold to Negociant directly because they didn't know how really to sell the wine, directly in bottle. And the Negociant were like pulling most of the supply to supply the market for Beaujolais, and the biggest market was obviously the Beaujolais Nouveau. It was getting very, very big, in the 70s, 80s, and because of that, the small producer kind of forget a little bit about how to sell their wine, directly, and they got very submitted to the Negociant, power of purchase, so they became very dependent on this market, and that was a big risk because after when the Nouveau market, start to collapse, all these vintners, were like in a very bad situation. So Robert was very visionary, in the 90s when he see that, and when they create Terroir Originel because they wanted to become less dependent, and be more dynamic and be able to sell their production directly in bottles, with their name on the label. So that was very visionary at the time, yeah.
Yeah. So I can imagine, we're talking about economics here, we're talking about marketing here, that at the beginning of this process, Robert and his colleagues probably faced certain challenges in overcoming the public perception, dealing with the challenge of having an established competition from the Negociant. Let's bring Robert into the conversation here, and I guess, Aurélien, you'll do a little translation as needed. But could he walk us through what was going on at that time and what sort of challenges he faced as he was starting up this process of starting to market these individual small producers?
Donc la question de David, c'est donc quand tu as créé Terroir Originel, quelle était la situation du Beaujolais, et un peu pour nous mettre dans le contexte, qu'est-ce qui t'a poussé à créer Terroir Originel, et quelles étaient les difficultés que tu avais pour vendre ton vin directement en bouteille. Donc qu'est-ce qui a fait qui t'a poussé à créer Terroir Originel pour t'aider à commercialiser tes propres vins?
Eh bien, il y a une vingtaine d'années, le négoce était comme maintenant. 80% du Beaujolais est commercialisé par leurs soins. Après, de formation vitiono, disons que mon métier, c'est vraiment de produire du raisin et de faire du vin. Et le commerce, c'est encore d'autres compétences et du temps à passer. Donc, si on passe beaucoup de temps dans le commerce, on passe moins de temps dans les vignes ou dans la cave. Donc voilà, l'idée, c'était de se regrouper avec des vignerons avec la même philosophie et d'embaucher des commerciaux, puisque la finalité, c'est bien de vendre notre vin en bouteille.
So Robert was saying the context, was that in the 90s, the Negociant were very, dominant on the market, and so the vintners were very isolated, and he decided to create the alliance because he could see that he don't have the skills, to sell his wine. Because it's very complex when you're winemakers. You have to know how to farm the vines, and make the wines, and that's really the skills that the farmer winemaker learn at school with the degree. But after to be able to put the wine on the market, the sales, marketing skills, he was feeling that he needed a structure, and a backup to do that, and to replace kind of the existing Negociant on the market. So that was the idea of Terroir Originel, is like to be able to mutualize with other vintners and have the finance to be able to contract people with the skills to sell the wine and become more independent from the Negociant. So that was the idea, and the other idea was to have a more diversified offer too. Because Robert was only, producing Cru, Brouilly, and Côte de Brie, So when you see a client and you only have 1 or 2 wines to offer, it's less interesting than to have a whole portfolio with all the appellation of Beaujolais.
And I think that's a very smart move. I'm familiar with maybe about half of the producers in the Terroir Original portfolio, and I think it's very exciting to be able to line them all up together and get a sense of the Beaujolais region as a whole, because each of these small communities within Beaujolais have very distinctive personality. But you're right, to be able to, you know, many of these families, and they're all family-owned properties, right? They're farmers. They're not marketers. They're not a big company, and so this was a very smart move on his part to put this group together. So I'm curious, in the beginning days of doing this, who did he approach? How did they start getting the word out, and where were their first successes?
Donc la question envers, c'est quand tu as démarré donc le projet de Terroir Originel, un peu comment ça s'est passé au niveau des débuts, donc les vignerons que tu as contactés, et quelles ont été les premières difficultés, mais également les premiers succès de Terroir Originel.
C'est une bonne question.
I ask good questions intentionally.
Non, la difficulté, c'est commencer de se faire connaître, quoi, trouver des clients, des ambassadeurs, des gens qui croient à nos vins, quoi. Après, il fallait aussi étudier tout ce qui était packaging. Les étiquettes n'étaient pas à la hauteur de nos vins. Voilà, on partait vraiment de zéro commercialement et il fallait trouver des commerciaux. C'est vrai qu'on a attaqué sur la France, notamment sur la restauration. Il fallait le début est le plus compliqué, je dirais. Maintenant, c'est plus facile parce qu'on est connu, quoi. Le plus difficile, c'est d'être petit, et quand on est petit, c'est difficile de se faire connaître, quoi.
So he said that the main difficulty at the beginning is like when you are small and you start, nobody knows about you. So the biggest problem was like to have people recognize you as an entity. So when they started, it was the main difficulty, and after about the look of the wines, the packaging, they were not like specialists in packaging and marketing. So of course when they arrived, with the first range, of wine with the labels, they were not always like very attractive. So that was a second difficulty, and after it was to find the right people to believe in their wines, and to become ambassador and to represent the wine on the French market and on the export markets. So that was like the three biggest difficulties from the start. Yeah.
I think this is all very telling, because many people have a sense of wine just sitting down at the table and pleasure, but don't really think about the context of the challenges that producers have to go through to get that wine to the table. So this is a great, very real story of the challenge of a group of small farmers who are going through a learning process. I've experienced a lot of their wines. They're all excellent wines, but how does the consumer find out unless there's a way to get them onto the market? So clearly, there was a vision here that made a lot of sense. So ultimately, there was some initial distribution in France, I'm assuming initially, and then how did things grow after that?
Donc la question, Robert, c'est au départ, donc il y avait donc une commercialisation surtout sur la France, mais c'est comment ça a évolué dans le temps. Donc c'est parti de la France et après évidemment sur l'export. Mais quelles ont été un peu les étapes et comment ça s'est passé?
Bien, la priorité de la France, c'était, comme on dit, il faut mieux être roi chez soi qu'avant d'être roi chez les autres. Et puis après, voilà, il faut aussi les moyens de ses ambitions, c'est-à-dire que exporter, souvent, ça coûte quand même plus cher que le marché qui est à côté, que ce soit la France ou l'Europe qui nous touche, quoi. Voilà, pour vivante, quoi. crus du Beaujolais sont vins qui ne sont pas assez connus encore, donc il faut des ambassadeurs comme Aurélien pour nous faire connaître, faire déguster les vins, expliquer notre travail. Donc voilà, c'est une histoire de moyens. C'est bien de le produire en France, mais après, quand on veut finalement exporter, il faut aussi des moyens derrière, quoi.
So Robert was saying that like the first market obviously was France because he considered that it was important to be present on the national market first from the beginning, and after he's to develop the export markets. You need it represents a coast. So the development of the French market, was available to help after to develop the export market in the second time. And he's like very aware that the cru of Beaujolais are very unknown. Even on the French market, it's like French consumer doesn't know all the cru of Beaujolais. So it's even more the case on the export markets, and that needs a lot of time and a lot of energy, and time from people to explain and educate, professional and consumer about the cru of Beaujolais and the potential of Gamay beside the nouveau wine.
Yeah. So you're bringing up a very interesting issue because I think probably up until the 80s or even early 90s, international distribution of wines, particularly from France, were you had Champagne, you had Bordeaux, you had Burgundy, maybe you had a little bit of Beaujolais Nouveau, from the 60s and 70s. But there's a big education challenge, and then suddenly there's more wine coming from everywhere around the world competing as well. So there's a lot of education in this process. We've been referring to the crus of Beaujolais. I mentioned that Robert, actually we both mentioned he's in Brouilly, in Côte de Brouilly. Maybe you can give us a little bit of context for Beaujolais as a region. Give us a short introduction to the crus and that structure and why that's important and what it's all about.
La question de David, c'est sur le Beaujolais. On a parlé de tes crus de Brouilly et Côte de Brouilly. Et donc, il aimerait avoir plus d'informations pour les gens qui nous regardent sur la région du Beaujolais en général et sur la proportion des crus par rapport au Beaujolais Village et savoir si c'est important, voilà, que ça forme un tout. Ouais.
Les crus du Beaujolais, c'est à peu près un tiers de la production globale du Beaujolais, quoi. Il y a un tiers de Beaujolais Nouveau, un tiers de Beaujolais Village de Garde et un tiers de crus. Après, on est sur du Gamay, donc monocépage. On est bien dans la Bourgogne, dans la Bourgogne du Sud. Donc monocépage. Et la différence finalement entre les 10 crus du Beaujolais au niveau du goût, c'est vraiment les terroirs. Quand on parle de vin de terroir, je crois que les crus du Beaujolais sont vraiment un exemple de vin de terroir, quoi.
So he's saying that Beaujolais, the global production, 1/3 it's made with the nouveau style, 1/3 it's Beaujolais and Beaujolais Village, so we call them the generic appellation of Beaujolais, and after the last third it's the cru of Beaujolais, and we have 10 cru, 10 villages. And I think it's very important because in Beaujolais we only have basically one grape. You say two because there's Chardonnay, but Chardonnay represents only 3% of the production.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that small.
Yeah, it's very small. So Gamay is like the big varietal of Beaujolais, and he thinks like the way to show and to have the nuances between the wines. It's like rely on the terroirs, and the terroirs, come from the 10 different cru of Beaujolais, and he thinks for that reason, Beaujolais is very, very similar to Burgundy in the spirit, because we only make wine with grapes, with only one grape, and coming from the different spirit of every cru, every terroir. So I always say in Beaujolais we don't make wine with grapes, but we make with stones, because it's all like depending on each type of soil for the different appellation of Beaujolais.
So, there's 10 of them. We don't want to go through all 10. That would take us a while. But can we get an example maybe of two? And we've heard the word terroir in the name of the company. Robert's used it a couple of times. But I think could we get two examples of what specific terroirs might be within two of the crus, just to understand how they express themselves differently?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Donc David a une bonne question, c'est sur la. Il voudrait qu'on cite deux exemples de crus avec des terroirs vraiment différents. Donc peut-être qu'on peut partir sur Brouilly et Côte de Brouilly, ouais. Ils sont.
Oui, c'est un bon exemple.
Ouais.
C'est vrai que Brouilly, on est plutôt sur du granit rose, donc ça donne des vins sur le fruit. Le gamay donne des fruits rouges, des fruités croquants. Et les côtes de Brouilly, on est plutôt sur une roche volcanique, donc beaucoup plus des vins avec de la violette, des épices et de la réglisse, beaucoup plus d'épices. C'est vrai que les crus se ressemblent beaucoup au niveau du nom, par contre, sont très différents. De la roche bleue d'un côté et de la roche rose de l'autre côté.
Donc Robert expliquait les différences entre deux crus. The differences between the Cru Brouilly and Côte de Brouilly, they are very close to each other, Côte de Brouilly, it's the slope, so it's like higher elevation. It's about 1,200 feet high. And Brouilly, it's the appellation, but below, surrounding the hill of Brouilly. And the terroirs between these two appellations are very, very different because when it's higher, the Côte de Brouilly, it's a blue granite, and the one around it, it's a pink red granite. And I have some samples to show you the differences. But that's, for example, come from the Côte de Brouilly.
Uh-huh.
So it's a very dark blue with some green veins, So a lot of mineral from this terroir. And the wines are a little more, darker, spicier, a little more licorice, and more tannins. And the wines on Brouilly, the grapes is growing on more red, pink granites. On this type of soil, the wines are just softer and with more red berries and floral notes too. So that's a very good example to show the differences between these two appellations.
And so there are 8 more. I think people will often see wines from Brouilly and Côte de Brouilly. What are some of the other larger producing areas? I mean, I think we often see Morgon, we see a lot of Moulin à Vin, we see a lot of Fleury. Maybe those. Have I missed one of the larger production ones that we would see often in wine shops or on wine lists?
Yeah, I think it's like the top 5 cru on the market. It's Morgon, Brouilly, Moulin à Vent, and Fleury and Juliena. That's the top 5. After the other appellations are just smaller and less exported. Saint-Amour is pretty popular too because I think people love the name of it, and it sounds very, very French, but it's still like a small appellation.
Yep. For anybody who missed that was Saint-Amour, Saint of Love, or
yeah, Saint Love, so, yeah.
So it, around Valentine's Day, it's probably a big seller.
It is, yeah. Okay. On the French and export market too, yeah.
Okay. So we have some context for understanding all of the different crus. We understand that there's a different terroir, there's different expressions of each of these places. I want to just jump back in history because as much as I know about Beaujolais in the modern time, I really don't know a lot about what happened before the 1960s in Beaujolais. What is the history of the place? How did it come to be what it is today?
It's a good question, yeah. Donc la question de David, Robert, c'est comment était le Beaujolais dans les années 60 ou avant les années 60, avant qu'il y ait l'arrivée du Beaujolais nouveau, et nous expliquer un peu comment ça a évolué dans le temps. Ouais.
Disons que le vignoble était pratiquement 2 fois moins grand puisque les viticulteurs étaient polyculteurs, il y avait beaucoup d'élevage. Dans les années 60, 2015, on va dire que la viticulture s'est vraiment spécialisée en monoculture, on va dire. Mais à l'époque, le vin était surtout bu sur les deux grandes villes qui étaient Lyon et Paris, quoi. Ça descendait par bateau sur Paris, mais c'était des vins qui étaient... enfin, les crus du Beaujolais, même dans les années 70, étaient énormément consommés en France, quoi. C'était des vins qui étaient beaucoup, enfin, très appréciés des Français. Enfin, oui, ils étaient beaucoup bu sur place, quoi.
So it's saying that before, in the 60s, 50s, it was still like the polyculture, dominating the farming. So they were not like specialized, in grape farming or winemaking, but they were doing, other type of culture. So the size of the vineyards was, 2 times smaller than after. So the quantity produced were smaller, and most of the wine were consumed, in Paris or Lyon, and the cru of Beaujolais were more popular. It's funny, but when you see movies from the 60s, 70s, often you can see, bottle of cru Beaujolais, on the shootings of movies with, Louis de Funès. So they were like very popular wines, and they were as expensive as, the cru of Burgundy, or from Northern Rhone, like some Côte Rôtie or Cornas. The price
You
of the
say
wine
that they were as expensive?
they were, yeah, at the same level, for example, yeah, like some Cornas or Côte Rôtie were the same price as some Juliana or some Morgon. And after what happened, in the 60s, 70s with the arrival of the Nouveau and the marketing of the Nouveau on the market, the cru got a little bit forgotten, and the price of other wines of the region went up, and Beaujolais stay steady or even like go down a little bit. So the difference start to appear, between them.
So you raise an interesting topic. I had no idea that that these wines were holding their own at prices that were similar to Cornas, you said, to Côte Rôtie, and to Burgundy. Now, to give some context, not all of those places used to be as expensive as they are now, but they are now producing very expensive wines. Whereas the crus of Beaujolais are some of the best values in wine. Now that's a good thing for consumers, but maybe not such a good thing for producers.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, for consumer, like it's like amazing opportunity, because the cru of Beaujolais now on the market, are between 15 and 25, and most of the time, like, you can find a good cru under $20 a bottle, and it's when you see all the work, behind the bottle, because like a lot of people think, because of the Nouveau Beaujolais, it's a very industrial wine region, but it's wrong. Beaujolais is very artisanal. It's one of the most, artisanal region in France. Why? Because we do unpick grapes. The AOC regulation, in France, impose Beaujolais producer to unpick the grapes. The only 2 regions in France doing that is Champagne and Beaujolais, where the AOC, imposed manual harvest. All the other area, they are allowed to use a machine if they want.
This is a very important point. I've never heard this until just now. So it is by law required that the fields are farmed by hand, no machines allowed.
Yeah, and the main reason is to do the carbonic maceration, with the typical way of winemaking in Beaujolais. We vinify with whole cluster. So in order to keep the whole berry, we need to keep the stem, and you need to pick up by hand the grapes. Yeah. If you use machine, you are distemming the grape, and the juice start to come out from the berry. So in Beaujolais, we try to conserve this tradition, and therefore we unpick the grapes, and at the same time that help to conserve and keep like a high quality, because the sorting it's better done by humans than by machine, obviously. So it's it's very artisanal vineyard. So when you see all the work behind that, like all the pruning made by hands, it takes like about 5 months to prune the vineyard for every farmer. So it's a long process. And after all the work, on the vineyard, it makes complicated because of the high density of plantation. In Beaujolais, we have a very high density. We have about 10,000 vines per hectare. So the vines are very close to each other. So you are not spaced to go with a machine, in the vineyard. So it's a very archaic region, and the cost of production is higher than other area where you have like more space between the vine, and the vines are like on canopy, higher. It's easier to modernize the farming. Beaujolais is very artisanal and archaic vineyard. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think you've made two really great arguments here for why consumers should be supporting Beaujolais producers. One is obviously they're not commanding the prices commercially that they deserve, and two, they have a lot more cost because of the manual work. I'm interested to hear Robert's thoughts on this subject and how sort of the financial picture of the issues that you've raised affect a typical Beaujolais producer. Perhaps not him, but what is the financial challenge that Beaujolais sees as a result that you may not see in other regions?
Donc David aimerait savoir. Donc on parlait des rapports qualité-prix dans le Beaujolais, et c'est vrai que c'est un vignoble qui a des vins avec un très bon rapport qualité-prix pour les consommateurs. Et il aimerait savoir un peu, étant donné le coût de revient, le coût de production qui est assez important en raison de tout le travail qui est fait artisanalement dans le Beaujolais, quel est le défi pour les producteurs pour que ça soit viable économiquement, et comment on doit être organisé, et c'est important pour le consommateur de savoir.
So it's a big question, but thank you.
Oui. Quand on est dans le commerce, on veut toujours vendre plus cher. Non, mais on n'est pas loin d'un certain équilibre. C'est vrai, comme tu l'expliquais, on a un vignoble très artisanal, très difficile à travailler, et on n'est pas assez connu ou reconnu. Donc, je pense que la mentalité des vignerons du Beaujolais veut que leur vin soit abordable, parce que c'est un vin qui aime la convivialité. C'est dans le sang des vignerons, donc on voudrait le retrouver dans la vigne. Et c'est vrai qu'il faut qu'on arrive un tout petit peu à monter en image et au niveau du prix. Déjà parce que plus on a les moyens, plus on peut faire meilleur demain, quoi, hein, c'est sûr. Et puis voilà, et d'investissement. Mais je pense que quand on a choisi le métier de vigneron en Beaujolais, on n'a pas envie de faire fortune, quoi. Mais on sait que pour être meilleur demain, il faut quand même des moyens, et aussi se faire connaître dans le monde entier. C'est une histoire de moyens, quoi. Et le Beaujolais souffre de ce dynamisme commercial qu'a la Bourgogne, mais que n'a pas le Beaujolais. La Bourgogne, là, par ses grandes maisons de négoce, peut-être ses grands vignerons, et le vignoble du Beaujolais, il faut vraiment qu'on apprenne à se faire connaître, quoi. Et là encore, il faut aussi des moyens, quoi.
So you say, yeah, there's a double challenge, comparing to the cost and the price of a bottle of wine. The first one is like obviously the production, and you say it was a big challenge, to economically, with all the works, behind the bottle of wine, and the price you sell it, to make it sustainable for the estates. So you have to do an effort on that. And after the second one, the second challenge is like to have as well to the money to market the wine, and export it. So that's the two challenges, you have in a price of a bottle of wine. But I think thanks to the collective Terroir Genel, that helped all these small isolated vintners to become more competitive, because at the level of production, they can share facility to bottle the wine, to filter the wine. They can share a machine, an engine to farm in the vines too. So they get more competitive on that way. And after on the marketing and sales way too, they can mutualize and be stronger on the market. And it's it's interesting because at the same time they can stay small, and very unique, very individual with their own terroir and their own way to vinify. And at the same time, with the collective, they are more competitive on the global market.
Yeah. So clearly, there's some major benefits to having formed Terroir Original. Helps with some of these challenges that the individual producers are facing, and that's a very very smart. We talked a bit about the region. We've mentioned the Gamay grape a few times, but could you give us an idea just of the context for this grape in the wine world? I mean, many of our viewers may be familiar with Napa Valley Cabernet. They might be familiar with Pinot Noir, whether it's from the New World or the Old World. They might be familiar with some Italian varieties like Sangiovese or Nebbiolo, but Gamay is a grape that is planted in a very few regions around the world. A little bit in North America, a little bit in the region that you're originally from, right on the Swiss border, if I remember, and in Beaujolais, and a handful of other places. So, what is the grape about? What is sort of compared to some other grapes, lighter, heavier? I think having some context for knowing the styles that it produces would be kind of helpful too.
So that's a good question. Gamay is not very well known, yet. It's still like a very small, plantation in the world. I think it's about like 25,000 hectares, and Beaujolais gathered 2/3 of the plantations. So Beaujolais is still like the kingdom, for the Gamay grape.
So that's 2/3 of the planting of Gamay in the world are in Beaujolais.
Yeah, in Beaujolais, yeah, about 2/3, yeah. And after you have a little bit, in other places in France like Touraine. You have some in Ardèche too. You have some in Aoste, the Valley Aoste with the Italian border. And after, as you say, a little bit in the U.S. and Canada and other countries. But I think it's getting more popular because the Gamay really respond to the new demand, for drinkable wine, lighter wine. Now on the market in France, but as well on the export market, consumer are looking for wine which are easier to drink, with less alcohol. So that goes, with the driving, obviously, and the control, of to be able to drive and be safe. But all this new trend, start to arrive in end of the 90s and 2000, because before people were drinking more like bolder wine with more alcohol and like Italian or more wine from California. And I think the change start to appear, and Gamay is a really good varietal feeding this new demand from the consumer. Gamay is a son of the Pinot Noir, so it's very similar to the Pinot Noir, and it's very fruity with some spice and some floral notes too. And it's the same family as Pinot and Chardonnay. And the Gouais too. That's a grape from Slovenia, Eastern Europe. Contribute to the Gamay as well. It brings the acidity to the Gamay.
So it's related to the Gamay.
Yeah. The Gamay is the son of the Pinot Noir and the Gouais. Yeah, the Gouais is a white grape from Slovenia, and so it's the one of the parents of the Gamay with the Pinot Noir. Yeah.
Okay.
And Chardonnay is like a brother of the Gamay.
Now, I've heard some people say that when a Gamay ages, there's a term that you use that it pinotes, that it almost becomes like a Pinot.
That's correct. Yeah, after I would say 5-6 years, the Gamay start to change, and the profile of the Gamay get very similar to a Pinot Noir with a little more spice, a little more dry flowers, a lot of stone fruits, and some like brandy, kind of kirsch brandy notes, cherry brandy notes, very similar to the Pinot Noir from northern Burgundy. Yeah.
Well, this is great. So let's look to the future now. What is happening in Beaujolais? We've seen quite a change over the last 40 or 50 years in terms of from Nouveau to small producers getting more recognition, more distribution around the world. To Robert, what is the discussion happening among producers within Terroir Originel and within Beaujolais in general about what they'd like to see going forward from the region?
Donc David aimerait savoir comment tu vois le futur pour Beaujolais et qu'est-ce que tu voudrais pour toi et puis pour les autres vignerons de Terroir Originel aussi, comment faire évoluer le Beaujolais, l'image du Beaujolais et dans quel sens tu voudrais que ça aille, ouais.
Disons que pour les vignerons de Terroir Originel, ça se passe déjà très bien et on est très optimiste. Je suis très optimiste pour la région du Beaujolais, puisque les crus, notamment, commencent vraiment à être reconnus, appréciés. Il y a eu une grosse remise en question dans deux vignobles en France, je trouve, c'est le Languedoc et le Beaujolais. Donc 20 ans de travail acharné sur la qualité, je trouve vraiment ça porte ses fruits. Et voilà, et si tous les vignerons du Beaujolais croyaient autant que nous à leur métier et à leur vin, demain tout va bien se passer pour nos vins. Mais c'est vrai que je suis très optimiste pour le Beaujolais. Et sachant qu'en Bourgogne, dans la Grande Bourgogne, la production de rouge est quand même chez nous, puisque aussi bien Chablis que la Côte d'Or ou le Mâconnais, c'est quand même une production de vin blanc, quoi.
Et tu penses aussi que les premiers crus vont aider aussi à ça, ouais?
Oui, ça va être une reconnaissance de plus où on s'aperçoit que les premiers crus seront des vins commercialisés plus tard, et c'est pour aider aussi le consommateur à dire que les crus du Beaujolais peuvent se boire jeunes et aussi se boire à 5 ans, 10 ans et 15 ans, quoi, hein. La notion de premier cru va donner, à mon avis, ce côté vin de garde, quoi.
Donc Robert was saying that he was optimistic, about the producer of Terroir Originel, but about all the region too in general. He's really thinking that the recognition of Beaujolais will come, with the cru and the wine made, in an artisanal way, and respecting, the spirit of the place. And he thinks as well that we are, establishing now a new appellation to determine premier cru in Beaujolais, like they have in Burgundy and in Alsace, and that will happen for every cru of Beaujolais. We will have a few selection of terroir, of vineyard that will have the first, growth premier cru, designation on the label.
And how does that materialize? Is that something that's being discussed and those locations are being identified right now?
Yeah, that started in 2008, and for the last 2 years, an audit, was made in Beaujolais to inspect, every cru of Beaujolais, and Robert is in charge for the Côte de Brie appellation. But they were investigating every soil and digging, the soil to see the terroir and try to determine, a few areas, vineyards who could have the premier cru designation. And Robert thinks it's very important to give credit, to Beaujolais as a serious, wine region with being able to produce wine, with a aging potential, not only, young wine drank, the same year as you produce them. So that's very important to give more credit to Beaujolais and its terroir, because every time, again, when we speak about Beaujolais, we speak a lot about Beaujolais in November, during Thanksgiving and during the Nouveau time, but we forget that Beaujolais has, very unique and amazing terroir, and I think the premier cru will help to give more credit to this terroir. And the other point that Robert told us too is thinking that Beaujolais brings most of the red wine, from Burgundy, because when you look at Burgundy, it's mainly white wines from the Côte d'Or and from Chablis. So Beaujolais is one of the main supplier of red wines for all the Burgundy region. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I have to say that I appreciate Beaujolais in all of the permutations that it comes. I love the pleasurable young wines. I love the fact that it has the potential to mature into something that's multi-layered and at a value much greater than some of the wines to its north or south. So this has been terrific. Listen, I want to make sure that I don't keep you much longer. I'd love to make sure that you guys have a chance to let people know where they can find out more about the Terroir Originel producers. We'll get your website listed as well so people can find you. And I'd love to end this by asking, for somebody who is new to Beaujolais, what would you or what would Robert recommend is a good sort of starting process for people to make a discovery of the breadth and depth that exists in Beaujolais and move forward from there?
Donc la question de David, c'est quel conseil tu donnerais aux consommateurs pour découvrir le Beaujolais? Pour les consommateurs qui connaissent encore pas bien le Beaujolais, quelles seraient tes suggestions pour leur permettre de découvrir les vins de la région?
Commencer par un brouillis de chez Perrault, par exemple.
If you didn't catch that, I think that the best way to get started with Beaujolais is to enjoy some of Robert's wines. So.
Non, le mieux, c'est d'acheter une bouteille des 10 crus et de les comparer. C'est ce qu'il y a de mieux à faire. Parce qu'ils verront qu'il y a vraiment une véritable diversité avec un seul cépage. C'est magnifique. Ils peuvent commencer par 3 ou 4 ou 2 ou 3, mais c'est vrai qu'il faut de la curiosité sur les crus du Beaujolais et il faut apprendre à les découvrir.
So he said that it's very good to be able to buy several cru, like the 3 or 4 bottles from the same vintage, and to be able to compare them to really see the impact of the terroir on the wine. And I guess now with the wine bars we have in France, but in the US too, and other countries, a lot of now people promote Beaujolais by doing flights of different cru, and I think that's the best way to discover Beaujolais and to see the nuances between the terroir. But Gamay is very fascinating grape, and I think it's a grape which is able to really reflect, the terroir and the depth of each place. And it's very interesting to do it with Beaujolais because one more time they are very affordable wine. So you have a lot of Beaujolais by the glass in the wine bars, so it's an easy way to approach them.
Yeah, so you suggest get 3 or 4 bottles of the different cru. Nobody's going to be breaking the bank with that. If they're $15 to $20 a pop, it's as affordable as buying one mid-priced California Cabernet. So it's a great opportunity for people to explore. Well, this has been great. Hey, listen, I want to know, where can people learn more about Terroir Originel, and we'll, of course, leave a link right next to this video for people to click on, but where can they find more about you and the organization?
Yeah, so they can go on the website, of Terroir Originel. So it's terroir with an S, dash original.com. So we have a website with all the producer, member of the collective Terroir Originel. So you will recognize, the estate of Robert Peroux. And every producer has his own website as well. And if you look on the website, you have the list as well of the different states, we sell in the US and the different countries in the world. And if you have any question, you will find my contact as well on the website, and you can send me an email, and I can answer you about place to buy wine, or if you need any suggestion, advice about the wines.
Well, that's great. So it sounds like you can even find places where the wines are available. So if people are not familiar with, or they're used to shopping in, a large shop or a grocery store, and want to find some place where they can find small producers from your portfolio, it's a terrific resource. Well, that's really helpful, and thanks for offering your personal assistance for consumers out there as well. So great.
Okay.
Hey, Aurélien and Robert, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. This has been a great pleasure. I encourage everybody out there to discover Beaujolais. It's one of my very favorite wine growing regions in the world, and not a couple of weeks goes by when I don't have a bottle of Beaujolais with my dinners. And I encourage you out there to do the same. So I want to thank you, gentlemen, one more time, and hope to have both of you back at some point in the future again.
Yeah, thank you, David, for having us, and I hope it will help people get to know more about Beaujolais and try some. Yeah.
Great. And Robert, thanks to you as well.
Thank you, et au revoir.
All right, we will look forward to seeing you on another episode of Wine Conversations very soon. For now, this is David Baer signing off, and I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon.